Other questions for Mr. DeVore? Of course. Senator Hancock.
Just to follow up on some of Senator Leno's questions, because it's been very difficult in California, as you know, to sort of have diffused, policy-driven discussions about how we right-size our prison system, how we save money, given the other things that the people in the state want. But did you actually say that you thought that because there was a part-time legislature in Texas, lobbyist groups were less powerful and legislators could think for themselves better?
I think, Senator, I think it's a synergy of the fact that you have no term limits, right? So you have time for members to establish seniority. The fact that you combine that with part-time, and the fact that the government there is smaller. So the stakes are smaller, right? On a per capita basis, Texas spends a lot less. And it's a right-to-work state, unlike California. So while there are unions, they're not nearly as financially well endowed as they are in California. And so as a result, they participate in the discussion, but it's harder for them to dominate the discussion.
Okay, because we do have issues around organized voices, organized labor, whatever, connected with corrections. We also have DAs, sheriffs, police chiefs associations that aren't unionized but have appeared to uniformly oppose virtually any kind of change. And that's why it was of great interest to me if Texas had succeeded in overcoming that and actually
Senator, my impression is that those groups are active in Texas as well, but they're not as uniformly opposed to the reforms. And I think the most important thing is because Texas has already proven the efficacy of the reforms, the train's already left the station, and so people are beginning to get data showing that these things work. And so when they come to the legislature and express reservations, there's now a body of evidence that would seem to suggest that these programs are working, and of course, success makes for more success.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you giving us some examples of specific legislation.
We hope to see perhaps some parallel bills passed into law here in California. That'd be great.
Another question for you before you leave. My understanding from your description, the materials you've provided, the state inmate population has been on the decline.
Yes, sir.
Has there been any uptick in jail capacity? Are there any counties in Texas, not unlike California, where they are under caps? And then also, are there any waiting lists for rehabilitation programs, or is everyone interested in a program able to get that?
I'll have to get back to you with the answer to the second two. The state prison capacity, of course, has been declining, even while Texas is the most rapidly growing big state in the nation. You're seeing an influx, if you include natural population growth, of somewhere close to 1,000 people a day. So the population is just continuing to grow steadily. Because of that, there may be some additional capacity being built at the local level. What you see in Texas is the property taxes are a lot higher than they are here in California. Although as a percentage of income, it's not that much higher because housing's so much cheaper, right? But as a percentage of the value of the home, it ranges from 1.5% to almost 3%, versus the Prop 13 cap of around 1 plus Mello-Roos, right? And so what you see in Texas is that local sheriffs are, for example, able to promote and put on the ballot a jail bond and be able to build a jail more readily at the local level in Texas than is the case in California. Government is less centralized in Texas, so my impression is that the counties, and there's almost 300 counties, it's a big place, that the counties and the cities have a little more autonomy because of that significant base of revenue that they have with the property tax. And so there are cases that I'm aware of where, for example, sheriffs have sought to build a very modern jail facility in their county, as kind of a base of power, because they get a few more deputies. They have to now manage the jail. They can rent out the space to neighboring counties, so it can serve as an income center. So I'd have to look at it, on a per capita basis to really give you a good answer, because of course the state is just growing rapidly as to whether local space has been expanding. Now, as far as the waiting list, my impression is that there has been a waiting list, which is why you continue to see in the bills more bills that focus on these rehabilitation programs, and more importantly, more funding for those programs, because what started out as a pilot program in 2005 may have been expanded in 2007, and as people are seeing it working, then it runs out of money and you need to do it more. Now, the interesting things about these sorts of programs is the more money you put into the local level, we call it justice reinvestment, the less the state is spending because there's less people in the state prison system. But again, it's kind of like a catch-22, right? Because you're in a fiscally constrained environment and you've got competition for renting prison space in the case of California and housing dangerous inmates and the pressure from the federal judge panel. And it's so much more costly that for every person in that system, you've probably deprived 10 to 20 people of supervision and rehabilitation at the local level for every person that you have at the state prison system level.
The local jail and other bonds have a passage threshold of a simple or two-thirds majority?
Again, a good question. As I recall, it's simple. Texas has the second highest per capita debt at the state and local level in the country after New York. And again, some of that is that it's rapidly growing, right? So you've got this significant amount of infrastructure that's being built there. But a fair amount of it is also due to the fact that the locals are more autonomous than they are in California.
Any other questions? Senator Jackson.
Thank you, and I appreciate your coming back to visit us and willingness to share what's going on in Texas. So there are some interesting things going on, and I appreciate them. I've been listening in my office, so I'm not totally dealing on the blind here. But I don't recall hearing any discussion about the type of crime. And I was wondering, would you say that the type of crime that exists in Texas is very similar to the type of crime we have here? Do we have gang issues? Do we have issues of different communities that are pitted against each other, or pit themselves against each other? So are we really talking apples and apples? And if we are, could you address that issue of the crisis? Some people think it's a crisis of gang violence in some of our particular urban areas, and what do you do about that to address the problem? Because there's, that has other elements to it, just than sort of random criminal behavior, either based on poverty or based upon one's proclivity.
I think that the two biggest states are probably far more alike than either state would care to admit. You have in each state the exact percentage of residents who are Hispanic to the decimal point. Texas has about double the number of African Americans percentage-wise, as does California. You have diverse, large urban areas. Houston, now the fourth largest city in the country, passed New York City as the most diverse city in America last year. So, yes, there's a lot of similarity. The violent crime rates in both the states are also very similar, according to FBI statistics. In 2011, Texas's violent crime rate was a little higher than California's. In 2012, the most recent year reported by the FBI, it's a little lower than California's. So, yes, very similar challenges. I think that the difference has been that Texas, perhaps because of its kind of tough on crime Western image, felt more comfortable in innovating with some of these criminal justice reforms beginning in 2005 and really taking off in 2007. And as those reforms bore fruit and you saw the crime rate drop more rapidly than the national average and the money saved, you saw a willingness of lawmakers to then revisit and reinvest so that it's like a flywheel. It just keeps going faster and faster, and now reform is kind of part of the legislative culture to constantly come back and look at how you can improve the criminal justice system. So I believe the pathologies in both the states are very similar. In fact, from a demographic standpoint, there's no reason why it wouldn't be a little worse in Texas, because Texas has a younger population than does California, and typically crime is a phenomena of youth.
Senator Berryhill.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks for coming out here today. Do appreciate it. And would you agree that, I mean, percentage-wise, we really don't have any more people incarcerated here in this state? It just seems to me that the costs, once they are incarcerated, are just so much higher than anywhere else in the country. We got the best health care system of anywhere in the country, and that's one of the things, most expensive ones, which is one of the reasons why we're in this problem of early release. Would you not agree with that?
Yes, it's like being muscle-bound, right? You've got these high costs that take first priority on the budgetary pie, right? And then it leaves you with less money to reform and to innovate. And it's tough, because when you're in that system, when you're in that dilemma, how do you reform if you can't get a couple nickels to reform? But the challenge, Senator Berryhill, is that for every person you divert from going to state prison who's a nonviolent offender, someone you can get into treatment, someone you can get into job training or victim offender remediation, you will literally save between 10 to 20 times what you would have spent had that person gone to prison. Right. Now, that's in Texas, where our daily costs are half of what they are in California. So I'm going to guess that the ratio would be even higher here, probably 15 to 30.
Yeah, one of the things that really does frustrate me is there's a number of kids when they're younger, and kids make mistakes, and there's a certain amount of people in prison that can be rehabbed. But there's also a number of folks in prison that, if you talk to the people that in the know, will tell you these folks are never going to be rehabbed, and yet we seem to lump them all into the same category, and we throw them, and then we end up bringing a lot of them back. And so right. I think some of them fall through the cracks, and that's the frustrating part for me as I look at this thing.
You're completely correct, Senator Berryhill, and that is why what we've learned in Texas, when you do supervision of people who are on parole or probation, the important thing that you can try to do is reduce the ratio of probation or parole officers to people that they're watching, try to get that ratio down a bit, and give the system the ability to have immediate and incremental sanctions. Those two things. If that person on parole or probation goes astray, they have to have immediate consequences, and it has to be incremental, something short of sending them back to prison. And when you do that, you can guide the behavior of people who can be rehabilitated and increase the odds for success.
Who picks and chooses the winners and losers who go into these programs and who don't? Who doesn't in Texas?
Generally, again, you have to be a nonviolent offender. That's what this is mostly focused on, is the nonviolent offending community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Berryhill. I think you make a strong argument for differentiating between types of inmates, those who may have a hope of rehabilitation and may be more violent if not incarcerated, with those who fit a different profile, which is really a strong argument for the bill that Senator Hancock authored today, which just passed off our floor. Senator Anderson.
In follow-up to Senator Berryhill, you talked about incremental, short of going back to prison. What would that look like, and how does that look in Texas?
Well, sure. There's different privileges that people can have that might be revoked. For example, they are working and they get to go home at night. Well, if you didn't make your random drug test, you didn't check in with your officer, now you have to spend a weekend in jail for maybe a month. Or perhaps you have to wear a GPS bracelet. Or perhaps you have to check in more frequently, right? So it's just a system where you get the individual's attention very quickly, and you have a scale of things that you do to begin to take away privileges, so that individual understands that the ultimate end path of if I don't correct my behavior, is going to be going back to prison.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, I'm intrigued by your kind of two-tier state prison system. Could you help me understand how one is differentiated from the other? Is the higher level, for the lack of a better term, where you send your violent convicted criminals, or how does that work?
The state prison system in Texas, by my understanding, is for people who have sentences of a year or less. And what's happened in the past, again, kind of goes to the unintended consequences. There have been people who have been convicted, let's say, of a drug crime, who can go to state jail for a year. Or they can go into rehab and treatment for, let's say, half a year. And most of them, many will choose the state jail because it's easier to spend a year in the jail than to have somebody constantly haranguing you to clean up and get your life together. And so we have had to do some recent reform to prevent the easy out. Kind of ironic when you think about it. I mean, who would want to spend an extra year behind bars? But you actually had people doing that because the rehab and treatment programs in Texas were considered to be tougher than just kicking back in the state jail for a year.
So the 6-month rehab is the. Earlier in your testimony, you mentioned that there were two levels, but they were from both state prisons. So that's what I'm trying to get the distinction between. Who goes where?
The state jail system in Texas is really no different than the jail system anywhere else in the country. It's just run by the state. And it's people who have sentences of a year or less that are in the
equivalent to our county jails.
Yes.
Got it.
It's just that it's run by the state.
And paid for, and is there any share of cost with those 300 some odd counties?
I don't believe there is, which is, again, one of the challenges where you incentivize counties to send people up to be state responsibility. That was happening in Texas. There was an awareness that was happening, and so there's been some effort to tackle that and to try to incentivize counties to treat the people that make sense to treat rather than sending them up to be the responsibility of state taxpayers for a year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Mr. DeVore, we're going to let you get your plane on time.
My wife would appreciate that. Thank you, Senator.
With sincere thanks for your taking time.
This is a follow-up
Senator Hancock, go right ahead.
on Senator Mitchell's comment. So what does the local jail do?
Again, there's no
Just
difference.
hold people pre-trial?
No, there's also the equivalent. It's just that it's a system that isn't here. It's just like the jail system, but it's run by the state. And it is for people who have the longer, closer to a year sentences. So I'd have to, if you're intrigued by this, from what I've learned about it, I would not recommend replicating it because we've actually had some issues with it in Texas, and we're trying to rectify those. So I'm not sure that that's an aspect of our system that is worthy of replicating, but I appreciate your being intrigued by it.
Thank you, Senator. Mr.
Thank
DeVore,
you.
thank you once again.
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you so much for this opportunity to return to California and to offer some policy suggestions, and I wish you the best of luck. We will be watching from 1,300 miles away, and I think the nation will be watching as you try to grapple with this very, very difficult issue. And good luck and Godspeed, members.
Please give our best to your friends at Right on Crime.
Thank you.
All right. Assistant Sheriff McDonald, thank you for your patience with us today. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
We're especially pleased to have you, given that you work for the largest county in the country, that you were a heavily realigned county, and at the same time you have seen your crime rate decrease. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senators, good to see you. I'm Terry McDonald, the Assistant Sheriff for Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. My responsibility is custody. I've been there approximately 10 months. Prior to that, I was the Undersecretary of Operations for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And so I have a pretty fundamental understanding of the custody environment within California. I am learning a ton about how the county operates. Fascinating to listen to Mr. DeVore because I've really been reading and learning about Right on Crime because it really is a front-end investment in reducing crime in the long run, and it makes good sense. Public safety realignment, from my perspective, is an incredible opportunity, but not without its challenges. Probably one of my favorite things about realignment is prior to realignment, maybe 20 people said recidivism in California. It was you guys, a couple of corrections people, and Department of Finance. Now hundreds of people are saying recidivism, right? And I say that jokingly, but I mean it. People are paying attention to what works and what doesn't work in criminal justice. There's an entire body of evidence that talks about the same concept that he's talking about, and many of the things he talked about, frankly, are laws here in California. He talks about sure and swift sanctions. That's flash incarceration. He talks about incentivizing counties not to send people to prison. That's SB 678. He talks about credits for offenders doing program. That's 4019. So a lot of these concepts we're already doing. Maybe better, maybe worse, maybe we can learn. But there's a body of evidence that really talks about saving your incarceration capacity for your higher risk offenders and trying to manage your lower risk offenders where you safely can in some other environment. And generally it's referred to as the RNR philosophy. The first R stands for assess their risk. And so assessing risk for jail beds, for example, might be a pre-trial risk assessment tool where we utilize a risk assessment versus bail as a decision about how you use that valuable jail bed. That risk might be what's their risk for recidivism upon release, and we use that risk assessment to determine who gets that valuable rehabilitative slot, right? It may be risk for reentry needs, and so that may inform us how best to assign them to a caseload, whether or not they need a 20-to-1 caseload by parole or probation or a 50-to-1. Needs really is where the sweet spot in this business is. You'll hear a lot about needs assessment. You'll hear Compass or North Point. You'll hear these different programs that people sell. And really all that means is that you're sitting down with inmates and you're figuring out what are their core problems that keep leading to their incarceration factors. Is it a drug problem? Is it a criminal thinking problem? Is it a mental health problem, a vocation problem, an education problem? And frankly, there's very few that don't have any of those, right? Statistically, 70 to 80% of all offenders have a drug problem, right? 70, 80%. Statistically, 30% have a mental health challenge. So assessing risk to determine where you're going to place people, whether it's a community-based alternative or whether or not they really need to be in a custodial environment, assessing their needs and then assigning them to a program that actually meets their needs. My favorite discussion is about putting drug dealers in drug programs, right? Because people didn't know. Here's somebody, you got a drug conviction, let's put you in a drug program, and you put a drug dealer in there, you put a sheep with the wolves, and you can't figure out why you're having such problems. New York, for example. New York is famous for large drug treatment centers as diversions. There are these 400-bed facilities that New York is using. Unfortunately, they're having major problems in those facilities because they were mixing drug dealers with addicts, and you're getting that criminal thinking and that criminal behavior. So assessing needs, and then the last R is responsivity, which is just kind of a Framalama term, which means what kind of program, what dosage, and how long. So if we're smart on crime at all levels, whether it's the county level or the state level, we begin to use these systems, and they become evidence-based. And we begin to tap into opportunity. One of the challenges is always going to be, I've been doing this a couple of years, right? I'm not a young woman anymore. And what happens is it ebbs and flows, and we don't stay the course, right? And so it's a brilliant idea to do risk, needs, responsivity, and invest in treatment events and program, and then a bad outcome comes. Some crime happens with somebody that we let do a drug treatment, and they get out and they do a horrible crime of killing a child, and everything ends, and the funding ends, and it stops. And so this RNR principle, it's not new, it's 20 years old. We're at a point in California, I believe, where we have to try to stay the course and that we don't panic with the bad outcome, right? I'll take a risk, I get fired, and then somebody comes in harder than me and everything shuts down. LA County, let me give you some statistics for LA County. LA County is the largest jail system in the nation. There is nothing larger. LA County, because of realignment, we have about 7,000 inmates in the system who would have previously been in state prison. That now makes us the 35th largest state prison system in California, in LA County. It's as though the state of Utah shut down its prisons, put everybody in a bus, and brought them across the border and gave them to us, right? And so we have to begin to have a better understanding about these long-term principles. The realigned population serving on average about 2.6 years. So we have an opportunity to work with them during this time frame. LA County, if everybody was to serve their sentences in LA County, we wouldn't have 19,200 inmates. We would have 23,500 inmates. LA County has an early release policy for the county sentenced inmates, that the county sentenced females serve 10%, county sentenced males serve 20%, and the county sentenced, there's a few higher risk categories referred to as M7s. Nobody can tell me why we call them M7. It probably started out as 7 charges and now it's 20. Those folks serve 40%. So LA County, when you talk about the system, truly, if the people serving their time had to serve their time, it would be much larger. Having said that, crime rates are good in LA County, or low. They're not good, I shouldn't say that. They remain relatively low in LA County, trended over time. We still have significant crime problems in LA
Even
County.
down over the past couple of years, not only historically.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we've got this group of inmates that are coming in, and we're really working on different opportunities for us. You may or may not like Obamacare. You may or may not think it was a good idea, but it does provide an opportunity for our incarcerated population. The Affordable Care Act now allows LA County and every other county to charge Medi-Cal for medical care provided outside the correctional environment for the pretrial population. And we have roughly 9,000 pretrial inmates in LA County. And so what that means is that if we get low-risk offenders, right, with a high need, high drug need, low risk, who are pretrial, we can enroll them, and if they're eligible for Medi-Cal, and frankly most of them are, because it's about how much money they make, we could place them in an alternative custody drug treatment program. We could. Here's where we're going to need some help, though. Under the federal guidelines for Medi-Cal, there's something referred to as the IMD provision. And forgive me, I don't know what the acronym stands for. But essentially, Medi-Cal won't... Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Senator. The federal government won't pay if the facility is larger than 16 beds. Well, nobody can afford to run a 16-bed drug treatment or mental health treatment facility. But if we get them benefit enrolled, A, if they go out for medical care, we can bill for that. But B, we also can take the low risk to commit violent offense in the community while they're going through their pretrial process, put them in treatment, right, and take advantage of that. That's one opportunity. The LA County jail system, thanks to Sheriff Baca, who today is Sheriff Baca's last day, and he will be replaced this afternoon by John Scott, who is the undersheriff for Orange County. He's going to come be the interim sheriff. But because of Sheriff Baca's leadership, there are 8,000 inmates involved in program in the LA County jail system. We know that the inmates that are in program in LA County are recidivating at a lower level than those county or state sentenced felons, the AB 109 guys, lower than those that aren't getting program. Now, don't anybody hold me to these numbers, because we don't have a statistician on staff to do these formal analysis for us. But our rough analysis is those AB 109 sentenced felons that are leaving who weren't in program, they're coming back, about half of them are coming back within the first year. Those, which is not good news for us, right? They're coming right back in the door, primarily for non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offenses. Those who are in program in custody are coming back 30% less, right? And so we know that if you assess risk, you address their needs through programming, that it has better outcomes. Same philosophy. So we've got program going on there. We're working with District Attorney Jackie Lacey on specialized mental health diversion. From my perspective, after doing this for a couple of days, the incarceration and criminalization of mentally ill in United States prisons and jails is one of the most shameful things that we do. And I just have to be honest with you, it shocks the senses. Senator Hancock was kind enough to come spend some time in the jail with me recently, and was able to walk through and see that. I know Ms. Mitchell's been there and other folks, but it's an area in which we have got to get our hands around it. So the Affordable Care Act gives us that opportunity. Recently, your learned body approved Senate Bill 82, and which provides some grant funding to the counties for diversion, for crisis centers, for capacity beds, because really we are locking people up for nuisance crimes who would be better served in mental health treatment. The recidivism rate of the mentally ill, whether it's LA County Jail or the state prison system, is the highest cohort that we have, other than car thieves. There's something about car thieves, they just keep coming back. They like to steal cars and keep coming back. But the Affordable Care Act and mental health.
Ms. McDonald, I'm going to have to ask you to begin to conclude.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll have time for questions, I know, but...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And before I conclude, I have to say this, that no matter how much programming we do, no matter how much we reduce recidivism through programming, the LA County jail system is an age system. And so I have to ask for consideration as we start to talk about additional jail bond funding in California, that we think about LA County getting 7,000 realigned inmates, and so far to date, only about $100 million in funding. We received 30% of the realigned population and 5% of the dollars. And the reason that the state prison system is so expensive is because the federal courts control what happens in the state prison system. I am experienced enough to know that will soon hit LA County if we don't act up front. And so I think if we're penny wise and pound foolish, it will harm the County of LA. So I appreciate your time today. I'm available for any questions that you may have, and thank you for your ongoing leadership on this difficult issue.
Assistant Sheriff McDonald, we are the ones who are appreciative of your time and for your very articulate presentation. We have some time constraints with our next presenter as well, so I'm going to ask Ms. Tamison, do I have your name correctly pronounced? Good. To make your presentation, and then we'll have questions for both of you, and I understand you have to be out of here close to 2.